Imagine coming home from a trip only to find the police waiting for you and your neighbor living in your house like she owned it. Lorraine Pritchard had always said she could spot trouble before it walked through the gate. But trouble, in her mind, was never what most people imagined. On that warm Friday afternoon in Scottsdale, Arizona, she was watering her potted petunias when a charcoal SUV rolled up to the largest home on Alder Bend Drive. It was the kind of vehicle she associated with outsiders, and she watched it slow to a stop right in front of the Whitestone mansion, a property she kept tabs on more than she did her own. The driver's door opened, and out stepped a tall man in a dark travel jacket, sunglasses still on, rolling a black carry-on behind him. His stride was unhurried, but confident, like someone who belonged there. Lorraine didn't see it that way. She reached for her phone almost reflexively, her mind racing with suspicion. 911, what's your emergency? There's a man about to enter a vacant home on Alder Bend Drive, she said without a pause, her eyes never leaving him. I think he's breaking in. Send someone quick. Inside the SUV, Terence Blakemore had no idea his return from London was about to turn into a neighborhood spectacle. His body still carried the stiffness of the 10-hour flight, and all he wanted was a shower and a proper meal. He'd come back 2 days earlier than planned, partly to surprise his fiancée, and partly because he missed the quiet of his own space. But before his suitcase wheels even touched the driveway's smooth pavers, he heard the faint wail of sirens in the distance, growing louder. By the time he reached the front steps, the flashing lights were already bouncing off the mansion's stone facade. 2 patrol cars pulled up, tires crunching over the curb. Sir, can you step away from the door? One of the officers called out, hand resting on his hip holster. Terence turned, eyebrows raised behind his sunglasses. Excuse me, this is my home. We just need to ask you a few questions, the second officer said, his tone measured. We received a report of suspicious activity. From across the street, Lorraine stood with one hand shading her eyes, lips pressed into a thin line. She wasn't about to hide her involvement. In her mind, she was the hero here. Suspicious activity? Terence repeated, setting his carry-on down. I just got back from a trip. I live here. You want my ID? You want to see my mail? I can unlock the door right now. The first officer glanced at Lorraine before stepping closer. Sir, we'll need to confirm your story. Could you provide identification and proof of residence? Terence exhaled slowly, pulled his wallet from his jacket, and handed over his driver's license. Check the address, then check the deed. It's in my name. One officer went back to the patrol car to run the details. The other stayed nearby, eyes scanning the property as if expecting someone else to appear. A couple of neighbors, drawn by the commotion, lingered at the edge of their lawns, murmuring to each other. Sir, everything checks out, the officer finally said, handing back the license. Apologies for the inconvenience. You're free to go inside. Apologies? Terence said, his voice sharp. Who even made this call? I did, Lorraine said, stepping forward, her chin raised as though daring him to challenge her. This house has been empty for days. I saw someone unfamiliar, so I acted. That's what a good neighbor does. Terence stared at her for a moment, trying to process the audacity. Unfamiliar? You've seen me before. I've lived here for years. Lorraine's expression didn't change. I don't keep track of every visitor. I thought you might be trespassing on my own property. Terence asked, his voice tightening. Do you call the cops on every neighbor who comes back from a trip, or just certain ones? Lorraine's jaw shifted slightly, but she didn't answer. The officers exchanged a glance before one of them said, Sir, you're free to enter your home. If there's anything else, we'll be around. Terence turned the key in the lock, eager to put this humiliating scene behind him. But the moment he pushed open the door, a strange smell hit him. Lavender candles mixed with something warm and savory, like chicken stew, the kind of smell that didn't belong in an empty house. He stepped inside, dragging the suitcase over the threshold, and froze. In the corner of the foyer sat a pair of women's sandals he'd never seen before. But the real shock was still waiting deeper inside the house, and Terence was about to find out just how far this good neighbor had gone. The sandals by the door were the first red flag. Terence stood there a moment, his hand still gripping the handle of his suitcase. He didn't own sandals like that, They were coral pink with a scuffed strap, the kind of thing you'd find in a clearance bin at a beach shop. And they absolutely didn't belong in his $3.4 million Scottsdale home. "Sir?" one of the officers called from behind. "Is everything all right?" Terence turned slowly. "Not exactly. Someone's been in here." Lorraine's voice cut through the dry desert air. "That's impossible. I've been keeping an eye on the place myself. No one's been inside." Her words made Terence blink. "Keeping an eye on the place?" he repeated. "How exactly?" "I check in sometimes, to make sure nothing suspicious is going on," she said, her arms folded tightly across her chest. The officer stepped forward, sensing tension brewing. "Let's just confirm if anything's out of place, sir. If you'd like, we can walk through with you." Terence nodded, motioning them inside. He wheeled his suitcase a few feet before stopping in the hallway. The faint scent of perfume, not his fiancée's, hung in the air. He knew his house down to every creak and draught, and something about the atmosphere felt lived in. The living room told the rest of the story. On the coffee table sat a half-empty bottle of Chardonnay, 2 wine glasses with smudged lipstick, and an open magazine from last week. A throw blanket from the guest bedroom draped over the couch as if someone had napped there. Terence pointed. "Does this look empty to you?" Lorraine's eyes flicked to the wine bottle, then back to him. "You were just what?" he pressed. "Hosting guests? Drinking wine? Sleeping on my couch?" The officers exchanged a glance. One took out a small notepad, jotting details. "Ma'am, are you saying you've been inside this home while the owner was away?" Lorraine's tone shifted to defensive. "I was safeguarding it. I noticed a stranger leaving last week, a woman carrying cleaning supplies. I didn't know if she belonged here." "That's my housekeeper," Terence said, his voice tightening. "She's been cleaning this place for years." Lorraine didn't flinch. "Well, I couldn't be sure. With all the crime these days, you can't be too careful." Terence moved toward the kitchen. There, the fridge told the rest of the story. Groceries he hadn't bought, leftovers in glass containers he didn't own, and a bag of apples he'd never seen. His pristine kitchen counter now held a coffee mug and a spoon still flecked with cereal milk. "You've been living here," he said, the accusation plain. Lorraine shifted her weight. "Temporarily. I thought it was safer if someone was inside, to deter anything from happening." The younger officer looked at her sharply. "Ma'am, you realize this is trespassing. Even if you had good intentions, you can't occupy someone's home without permission." "I had a key," she shot back, as if that somehow justified it. Terence's head snapped toward her. "You had a key? How?" Lorraine's gaze slid sideways. "Back when I chaired the security committee, we kept spares for emergencies. I guess mine was never collected." The older officer stepped in. "That's not standard procedure, ma'am. We'll need to make a note of this for our report." From outside, more neighbors had gathered. Curious faces pressed between the metal bars of ornate gates, whispers passing between them. Some looked embarrassed to be watching. Others looked entertained. Terence's jaw tightened. "So let me get this straight. You called the cops on me, claiming I was breaking into my own home, while you were actually living in it?" Lorraine didn't answer right away. "I didn't see it that way." "Oh, I'm sure you didn't," he said, bitterness creeping in. The officers clearly sensed the standoff was escalating. "Mr. Blakemore, would you like us to remain here while you assess the rest of the property? If any personal items are missing or damaged, we can document them now." "Yes," Terence said, his voice low but firm. "We're doing that." He led them toward the guest wing, an area he rarely used. But as he turned the corner, his steps slowed. Suitcases lined the wall. A neatly folded laundry basket sat on the bed. On the nightstand was a framed photo of Lorraine with 3 other women, wine glasses raised in a toast. "This isn't just you checking in," Terence said. "You moved in. You treated my house like a hotel." Lorraine's cheeks colored, but she stayed silent. The younger officer scribbled more notes. "Ma'am, you'll need to collect your belongings under our supervision, and we'll be having a separate discussion about this." From the doorway, Terence stared at the scene, at the evidence of someone inserting themselves into his private life without permission. It was invasive, disrespectful, and humiliating, all in one. But as much as this moment burned, The real storm wasn't about to hit until the neighbors took sides, turning this already absurd situation into a full-blown community war. The officer's presence had shifted from an initial suspicion of Terence to an obvious discomfort with the facts now surfacing. Lorraine, however, wasn't showing a shred of remorse. If anything, she seemed more annoyed that she was being challenged than embarrassed at having been caught. One officer, Officer Delaney, adjusted his sunglasses and said, "All right, Mr. Blakemore, we'll need to confirm ownership through dispatch. It's just procedure, even though your ID matches the address." Terence pulled his phone from his pocket. "I can make it easier. I have a PDF of the deed right here. It's on my cloud drive. Want me to airdrop it?" Officer Delaney smirked faintly. "That'll work." He tapped a few buttons, and seconds later, the officer was scrolling through the legal document bearing Terence's name and the full Alder Bend Drive address. The younger officer, Ramirez, looked at Lorraine. "Ma'am, I think this confirms the property belongs to him." Lorraine's lips twitched as if she was swallowing back a retort. "I didn't say it didn't. I said I was worried about strangers, that's all." "That's not all," Terence shot back. "You said you saw someone unfamiliar, so you broke into my home with a key you weren't supposed to have, and you stayed here for 2 weeks. That's not neighborly concern. That's squatting." "I wouldn't call it that," she said coolly. "I was protecting the property. Anyone could have come along and vandalized it." Terence's tone was dry. "Right. Because nothing says property protection like using my wine, eating my food, and sleeping in my bed." Lorraine's eyes narrowed. "I never touched your bed." "Oh, forgive me. The guest wing. My mistake," he said, his sarcasm cutting through the heavy air. Officer Ramirez stepped between them. "All right, let's keep this civil. Mr. Blakemore, can you confirm if anything is missing or damaged?" Terence gestured toward the kitchen. "The food, obviously. And the wine. She's been throwing events here. I mean, there's an entire trash bag in the bin outside full of takeout containers, not the kind I buy." Ramirez took notes while Delaney radioed something to dispatch. The sound of static and clipped voices crackled over the radio. Then Delaney nodded slightly. "Confirmed on our end. You are the owner. And yes, your housekeeper's vehicle matches the description in the earlier report. She's been here on schedule, as you stated." Terence's jaw tightened. "So my housekeeper was the suspicious person you called the police about?" Lorraine didn't blink. "Yes." "And you didn't think to maybe ask me before accusing her of breaking in?" "You weren't here," she said simply. Terence let out a humorless laugh. "That's the point. You're not supposed to be here either. This isn't your business." The neighborhood had grown even more curious. A man in gym shorts and a faded Arizona State t-shirt jogged past slowly, pretending to check his watch but clearly eavesdropping. 2 women with sun hats were now openly filming with their phones. Terence turned toward them and called out, "You all might as well take notes for the HOA meeting." One of the women chuckled under her breath. The other looked away. Lorraine, however, seemed unfazed by the attention. "I think most people here appreciate what I've done. Not everyone wants strangers hanging around an empty property." Terence stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "You mean people you don't know, or people you've decided don't belong here? There's a difference." Lorraine's expression hardened, but before she could speak, Officer Delaney cut in. "We're not here to debate intentions. Here's what's happening. Mr. Blakemore, you're in the right. Ma'am, you'll need to vacate immediately. If you refuse, we'll have to proceed with a trespassing charge." A flicker of panic crossed Lorraine's face, quick but noticeable. She crossed her arms tighter. "Fine, I'll leave, but I'm taking my things with me." "That's fine," Terence said. "You can take whatever you brought, but if anything of mine is missing, we're filing charges." Lorraine shot him a glare, but turned toward the guest wing to begin gathering her belongings. The officers followed her, partly to supervise, partly to ensure this didn't turn physical. Terence stood in the living room, running a hand over his face. The adrenaline from earlier was ebbing, leaving room for the frustration to settle in fully. He could already see where this was going. The HOA politics, the gossip, the way stories like this always got twisted until the truth was just one version among many. He muttered to himself, "She calls the cops on me, and I'm the one explaining myself. Unreal." Outside, more cars slowed as drivers tried to catch a glimpse. A teenage boy on a skateboard rolled past, asking a neighbor loudly, "What happened?" The neighbor whispered something in return, gesturing toward the house. Terence knew that by sunset, everyone within 3 blocks would have their own version of this story, but if he thought the worst was over now that she was packing up, he was wrong, because Lorraine wasn't leaving quietly, and the neighborhood was about to split into factions like it was the start of some suburban war. The sound of Lorraine's sandals slapping against the tile as she stomped toward the guest wing was louder than it needed to be. It was a statement, one meant for him and anyone else listening. Terence stayed in the living room for a moment, trying to control the anger building inside him. But when he heard a drawer slide open in the distance, his patience snapped. "Hey!" he called out, his voice echoing down the hall. "You don't need to be going through my drawers. I'm just getting my things." Lorraine's voice came back, defensive and clipped. The officers were with her, but even from the living room, Terence could feel the tension radiating through the house. He decided to follow, his sneakers squeaking lightly against the polished floors as he headed for the guest wing. The first thing he saw when he stepped inside was a suitcase sprawled open on the bed. But it wasn't filled with Lorraine's clothes. Half the space was occupied by bottles of wine, some still wrapped in tissue paper from his own wine cellar. There was also a stack of his dinner plates, separated by layers of bubble wrap. Terence stopped in the doorway, his eyes narrowing. "You're packing my stuff?" Lorraine didn't turn around. "I was holding on to these, for safekeeping." "Safekeeping?" Terence's tone sharpened. "That's my 2015 Cabernet Reserve, and those plates are from my grandmother's set. Safekeeping means keeping them in my house, not in your suitcase." Officer Ramirez stepped in quickly. "Ma'am, that's not your property. Please put it back immediately." Lorraine sighed loudly, as if this was all a ridiculous inconvenience. "Fine, but if something had happened to them while you were gone, you'd be thanking me." Terence didn't even respond. Instead, his eyes scanned the rest of the room. His guest bathroom stocked with toiletries he didn't buy, a makeup bag on the counter, and a brand new bathrobe hanging on the back of the door. He turned to Officer Delaney. "Do you see this? She's been living here, not checking in. Living. Full time." Delaney nodded, jotting notes again. "We'll document it all." That was when Terence noticed something else. A stack of envelopes on the nightstand. His mail. He stepped closer and flipped through it, seeing his name and address on every single one. Credit card statements. A notice from his bank. Even a letter from his insurance company. "You've been opening my mail?" he asked, looking directly at her. Lorraine finally turned, meeting his eyes without flinching. "I was making sure there wasn't anything urgent. You should be grateful I caught that late fee notice before it got worse." Terence let out a sharp laugh. "Grateful? You've been going through my personal information. You don't see how insane this is?" Lorraine's expression didn't change, but the silence from the officers made it clear they were just waiting for this to wrap up. Then came the final straw. When Terence walked into the adjoining sitting area, he stopped dead in his tracks. His favorite leather armchair, the one he kept in his home office, was there, but it wasn't in the condition he'd left it. The seat was covered in crumbs, and the side table next to it had a wine ring etched into the wood. "All right, that's it," he said, shaking his head. "Officers, I want this documented. Everything. Every glass, every bottle, every piece of mail. I don't care how small it is." Ramirez nodded. "We'll take a full inventory before she leaves." Lorraine muttered something under her breath, but when Terence asked her to repeat it, she stayed silent. That's when one of the neighbors, a woman in a wide-brimmed hat, appeared at the doorway. "I heard what's going on," she said quietly. "You should know she's been telling people you abandoned the place. Said you were barely here and that it was better for someone to look after it." Terence stared at her. "She said what?" The woman nodded. "Some people believed her, some didn't, but she's been pretty vocal about it." Terence felt the air shift around him. This wasn't just about his home anymore. This was about his reputation in a neighborhood where perception traveled faster than truth. Officer Delaney's voice broke the moment. "Let's keep moving. Ma'am, gather the rest of your things and head outside." Lorraine glanced at the neighbor in the doorway, then at Terence, and smirked. "Looks like the whole block's interested now." Terence didn't reply. His mind was already racing, picturing the conversations happening behind closed doors, the version of this story that would spread before the night was over. But what he didn't yet realize was that the neighbors weren't just talking, they were choosing sides, and the split was about to get ugly. By the time Lorraine had piled her things in the foyer, the word had already spread beyond Alder Bend Drive. People were showing up from 2 streets over, strolling casually past the mansion like they'd suddenly taken up evening walks. Some nodded politely at the officers, others whispered behind cupped hands. Terence stood with his arms crossed, watching Lorraine arrange her belongings in the most conspicuous way possible. 3 suitcases, 2 tote bags, a folded quilt, and a grocery sack that looked like it had been hastily filled with whatever she could grab. "Don't you think this is humiliating enough?" Terence asked, gesturing to the growing audience outside. Lorraine zipped her largest suitcase without looking up. "I don't feel humiliated. I was doing the right thing." "The right thing?" Terence's laugh was sharp. "You called the cops on me, told my neighbors I abandoned my home, and threw wine nights in my sunroom. What part of that is the right thing?" Lorraine finally looked at him, her chin slightly tilted up. "You're welcome, by the way. If I hadn't been here, who knows what could have happened? You think your housekeeper could have stopped someone from breaking in?" "My housekeeper has a job here. You don't." Terence shot back. "And you weren't protecting anything. You were making yourself comfortable." She glanced at the officers, as if expecting one of them to step in. "I didn't break in," she said firmly. "I used a key that was given to me when I was on the HOA security committee." "Which you should have returned years ago," Terence said. "Holding on to it wasn't some neighborhood duty. It was you keeping a way to get into other people's homes." Officer Delaney spoke up. "Ma'am, having unauthorized access to someone's property is not legal, no matter how you justify it." Lorraine folded her arms. "I don't care what you call it. I know this neighborhood better than anyone. I've lived here 20 years. I've seen people come and go, renters trashing lawns, delivery guys casing houses. I know what to look for." "You don't look for things by moving in," Terence said, his voice rising. Lorraine shrugged. "Sometimes you have to take action. You were gone. The house was empty. A woman was leaving with bags of stuff. My cleaning lady was leaving with laundry because she cleans my house," Terence interrupted. Lorraine ignored him and kept going. "And I thought, not on my watch. So I started coming by. At first, just to check. Then I realized it would be safer if someone stayed. I kept the lights on, brought in the mail, kept the place looking lived in. That's a deterrent." "A deterrent?" "You were the trespasser," Terence said, his voice hard. "You turned my home into your clubhouse. You used my things. You drank my wine. You went through my personal mail." Lorraine's eyes narrowed. "I was keeping an eye on your bills in case something important came through. If you can't see that I was helping, that's your problem." From the doorway, a neighbor spoke up, an older man named Victor Delmar, leaning on his cane. "Lorraine, you crossed the line this time." She shot him a glare. "Stay out of it, Victor." "No," Victor said, stepping a little closer. "You've been bossing everyone around for years like you own this street. Now look, you've embarrassed the entire neighborhood. You made us all look like fools." Lorraine's cheeks flushed. "You wouldn't understand. You rent." Victor let out a short laugh. "You think that matters? Wrong is wrong. And what you did to Terence was wrong," the crowd outside murmured, some agreeing with Victor, others muttering under their breath that Lorraine was just being a good neighbor. Terence looked at the officers. "Can we speed this up? I'd like her out before the sun sets." Ramirez nodded. "We're almost done. Ma'am, do you have anything else inside?" Lorraine hesitated for a moment, then shook her head. "No, but you all should remember. I've done more for this neighborhood than anyone here." Terence stepped forward, lowering his voice so only she and the officers could hear. "That's over now. Nobody's going to trust you again." Lorraine's eyes met his, and for the first time, there was no smugness, just a flash of something else. Resentment, maybe even fear. But as she stepped out into the desert sunlight, bags in hand, the tension didn't leave with her. It spread, seeping into every conversation, every whispered opinion. The neighborhood was now officially at war over what had happened. By early evening, Alder Bend Drive didn't look like a quiet residential street anymore. It looked like a stage. Every lawn seemed to have its own audience, from couples leaning against porch railings to retirees in lawn chairs sipping iced tea. Lorraine's walk down the driveway with her bags was a slow parade that nobody wanted to miss. Terence stayed by the front door, arms crossed, watching her pass the crowd. Some neighbors avoided eye contact. Others gave her small waves, as if afraid to pick a side too openly. But there were a few, mostly the same people who always backed her in HOA meetings, who nodded in approval, murmuring things like, "We know you meant well." Lorraine didn't miss a beat. She tossed